In a democracy, citizens need to be informed. Informed about policies, issues, homelessness, law enforcement, and social services. In order for people to make good decisions that affect their lives, they need to be informed. Conversations with Erroll Parker. Welcome back to Conversations with Erroll Parker, Part 2, with my good friend Kenny Booker, who played at Franklin Middle School and Long Beach Poly High School in basketball, and Long Beach City College in basketball, won championships there, and UCLA won back-to-back championships there. Played with some great, immortal people at UCLA. Went on to coach basketball at Bourbon Day High School, and he's currently a real estate agent and a good friend of mine. We talked about 20 years ago. But in this portion of the program, Kenny, I'd like to talk about the death of Bill Walton, who was a good friend of yours, and how you met Bill at UCLA and your relationship with Bill. And then we want to talk a little bit about John Wooden as well.
Oh, thank you, first of all, for allowing me to come in and speak, Errol. And yes, I do consider Bill Walton a friend of mine. And I can remember back in the days when he was a freshman and I was a senior. And the prior time when the freshman at UCLA had a 7-footer, it was Louis Alcindor. And that team actually beat the defending NC2A championship team when they played against them for the freshman and varsity game. And they came over, Bill Walton, Jamal Wilkes, and Tommy Curtis, and we had this scrimmage. And I think they anticipated that they might do the same thing that Kareem's team did because they had a 7-footer. Mm-hmm. But I can remember Bill trying to play defense on Sidney. And it just didn't happen that way.
Wow, so you just dominated him, huh?
It just didn't happen that way. Sidney, he was a very prideful person, and I believe that he did not want to have that on his calendar that was the day that the freshman team beat the varsity team. And he and Curtis kind of put on a little clinic. I can remember Sidney dunking on Bill, and they kind of felt like when they went back on the other side, they had a few more things to learn. But yes, and over the years, Bill and I would, talk with each other on the phone, and he would mention my name when he would do the broadcast at UCLA. He said, Kenny Booker's in the house, and he would always give me love, and I would always give Bill love. And I am saddened to the point to, have a teardrop to my eye because Bill was a great man, and I think when Kareem gave his testimony about Bill, he said that he was a great competitor on the court, and he was a great humanitarian, and Bill tried to please everyone as much as possible, and Bill brought the best out in all of us.
Well, I remember the duels that Kareem and Bill had when Bill was with the Portland Trailblazers. I mean, Bill put up some numbers against Kareem, and he was an all-around, I didn't know him at all, I never met him, but he was an all-around great basketball player, not only at Helix High School in San Diego, but at UCLA, and for that one brief year, a couple of years when he was healthy, it was the Portland Trailblazers in 1977 with Torzik and Maurice Lucas. And that outlet pass that Bill had remind me of Wes Unseld. He was an all-around great basketball player.
You brought up the thing that I thought that Bill gave all of his teams an advantage. When he grabbed a rebound, he would turn in the air.
Yes.
And before he even hit the ground, he did an outlet pass. And that was one of the biggest advantages that any team could ever get, especially if you had two good quick guards or even one good quick guard. You get that outlet pass, then you have a fast break.
Well, when you're playing with Keith Wilkes at the time and Henry Bibby, and you turn and you in the air, and when they see him go up, they're gone. And a guy like you, you waiting for the pass, and you can pass that ball quicker down the floor than you could dribbling it down. So Bill Walton and him, I think him and Wes Unseld probably had the best outlet passes that I ever seen in any individual. Like you said, Bill would get the rebound and turn, and
he would turn
bam!
in midair.
Yes.
And that would give your team a tremendous advantage. And I have been to his house in San Diego. I've had a dinner with him. I knew his family, and I just, like I said, I had a teardrop in my eye when I found out that. Well, I knew that there were signs that he was ill.
Yes.
Because prior to him passing yesterday, some people had told me that he hadn't answered his phone in a couple months. And I kind of suspected that he wasn't in good shape, and I had talked to Andy Hill, and he just said, Ken, one of the best things you could do right now is just pray for him. Because he's in bad shape.
Well, he had a stuttering problem.
Yes.
And one of the most embarrassing times in his life when he was at I think it might have been UCLA, when he couldn't speak well. And he was in a speech class, but he worked hard. Marty Glickman worked with him, and he worked hard and became a broadcaster. Now imagine having a stutter. They would not let you near a microphone if you had a stuttering problem, but he worked so hard, and then he got a job doing color commentary. That shows you the competitiveness of this young man.
Well, that not only shows you that, but it shows you that for anyone, he's an example that if you have a speech impediment, if you have something, a disability, you can overcome that and become great at what you do, even with having a disability.
In 1973, Bill Walton played in the finals of the NC2A. This man shot 21 of 22, made 21 of 22 shots, and a couple of them they took away because he dunked or came near the dunk. But can you imagine in the final game, 21 of 22 with that kind of pressure?
Erroll, I can imagine that because I witnessed it at UCLA with some of the great players they had. Henry Bibby did not miss a free throw a whole season. That kind of explains how well he was coached and how good some of the players were at UCLA.
Bill went on to play with Boston a couple of years and won a championship with Boston in a reserve role.
Yes.
But had not for that foot injury, a series of foot injuries, which really debilitated him, he was thinking about ending his life because the pain was so bad, but he overcame that. But it had not been for the foot injury that he had, he would even have been a greater professional basketball player.
I think so, and I think one of the things that you don't do if you have an 88-game NBA schedule is you don't back away from protein and meats. And I think that kind of affected his body because he tried to become a vegetarian and play on the NBA schedule.
Boy.
I think you need a steak every now and then, and some chicken every now. I think you need, besides vegetables and oatmeal, I think you need some protein in your body. And that might have been one of the things that maybe hurt him the most with his physical strength was I think he gave up protein.
You know, one of the things about Bill, and like I said, I never met him, but he transcended race.
Yes.
Bill saw no color, apparently. You know, he had friends, and he would give accolades. You know, being tough being African American, especially African American male. Bill would go out of his way to talk about history, to talk about civil rights. Of course, he was a protester on the Vietnam War, but he transcended race as far as I was concerned.
Well, Bill was a universal type guy, and he never really wavered or anything in regards to race, and some of his history lessons, some of his universal lessons, I watched on TV yesterday, and he was just a really good guy overall, and he had a great sense of humor, and some of the things that he would bring up in his broadcast, he did a lot of studying, and he knew history with sports. He knew history in American history, and he knew African American history as well, which I had to commend him for just being an overall great universal guy.
Speaking of great guys, you had the great pleasure of knowing Bill Walton, but even your coach, John Wooden. Now, Bill Mulligan was a great coach at Poly, but John Wooden had a great influence upon you. Tell us about the relationship you had with John Wooden as a coach and a friend.
Well, I can remember the first time I met him, and he had, nicknames like the Wizard of Westwood and stuff like that, which he really didn't like.
Mm-hmm.
But the first time I met him, I drove up to Westwood, and I met him in his office. And on his table, he had some little figurines. And I kind of looked at it, and it looked like he had a basketball court, and it looked like a little chess. He had guys with uniforms and numbers, and he looked like he was kind of moving stuff around on his desk.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, some of the comments that he made over the times I heard him speak, he would talk about during a basketball game, the time the ball was in the air. And I said, who thinks about stuff like that?
Mm-hmm.
And some of the other ideology that he had was put into his coaching system. And some of his sayings, failure to prepare is failing to prepare. Failing to prepare is preparing to fail.
That's right.
And he always seemed to be prepared in practice. And at the end of the games, or during the games, he would sit back, fold his uniform, fold up his program, tap on it, throw his wife a kiss, and he felt like he had done his job. And even when I read some of the things that he said about being involved in sports, he loved practice. His whole thing was the journey is more important than the end. Preparing for games, preparing for coaching sessions. He had an 8x10 card that every day, I don't know why he carried it, because we did the same drill from the first day of practice to the last day of practice, but we might have switched the drills around. But basically, fundamentals, his teams didn't make that many mistakes during the game. They didn't double dribble. They didn't walk or do a lot of stuff like that. His teams were more fundamentally sound and in better shape than the other teams.
Well, he believed that. I snuck in to practice one time, and you were playing with him, and you guys were about to go and play Notre Dame. They're going to travel to go play Notre Dame.
Wow, I remember that.
I snuck in. Somebody opened the door, and I snuck in, got way up at the top. And I said, wow, this is going to be a great practice. There's going to be a lot of competition. They're going to play inter-squad drills. And, I mean, Sidney Wicks was there, and Curtis Rowe, and you, and Henry Bibby, and like, it was like fundamental practice even before, I mean, you guys lost the game. I think it was.
I remember.
But I mean,
that was one of the few games that was televised that we lost.
But I expected inter squad game and get. But no, it was fundamentals the whole way. And like you said, he did that in the first practice and the last practice.
Many people ask me, is it true that he would take his shoe off, smooth the bottom of his socks?
Yes.
And it was true. It made sure that everybody had their shoelaces tied.
Mm-hmm.
Erroll, because those practices were really hard, and they were quickly done. And one of the reasons why he did that was prior to us going there, guys would get blisters on their feet.
Yes.
Because you continually moving for 2.5, 3 hours a day, that practice every day. And some of the players would, out of a 40-minute game, played 38 minutes.
Yeah.
And back in those days, timeouts were not 5 minutes. You know, you couldn't have the whole 5 commercials running. we had maybe a minute to a minute and a half for timeouts. You got enough time to go in there, sit down, and get back up and go back to playing. But these days, not to say that the guys are not well conditioned or the shoes aren't that good, but it seems like we were in better condition back in those days than they are now.
I want to digress from John Wooden a little bit and come back to that. Jerry Norman was the assistant coach, and I was an assistant coach in Long Beach Poly for many years. I haven't had a chance to talk to Jerry Norman, but kind of the unsung hero of UCLA basketball was the assistant coach Jerry Norman. Let's talk about who you knew, Jerry Norman, and he's still living. He's in his 90s.
He's still living. Now, Jerry Norman wasn't an assistant coach when I was there.
Oh, he wasn't? Oh, okay.
He wasn't. It was Denny Crum and Gary Cunningham.
I see.
Were the two assistant coaches that he had in those days. So when you brought him up, maybe one day you might get a chance to interview Michael Warren. Because Michael Warren and Jerry Norman are very close.
Okay.
And now, that zone press that Coach Wooden used, was it something that he devised himself, or did he see another team use that and then he used it? It's debatable. Some people say that I think it was Jefferson High School.
No, let me tell you, Kenny, and Jerry John was getting beat prior to getting Walt Hazzard and Goodrich. They were getting beat by Cal a lot, and Norman was trying to tell Wood, we need to speed up the tempo of the game. It's not like they were walking the ball up the floor. So he convinced John Wooden, when Hazzard and Goodrich was there, to put on the zone press because he had athletes. He didn't have a lot of tall guys before Kareem. And it speeded up the tempo, and you know where Walt Hazzard would get the ball when they would steal the ball and speed up the tempo, and they'd score 100 points. And Jerry Norman finally convinced John Wooden that Cal was beating, Pete Newell was beating him all the time.
Peter Newell, yes.
Yes, and he convinced Wooden, finally said, okay, we'll do that with the type of team that he had, with Hazzard, Goodrich, and Hirsch and those guys. And Jerry Norman was the one they say was convinced Wooden.
Well, like I said, one of these days you might get a chance to interview Michael Warren.
Mike Warren.
And I know that Norman was there the full time that Michael Warren was there.
That's right.
Yes.
And I had a conversation with Lucius Allen recently, and I'm sure I'm going to try to get him in the studio as well. But when you look at John Wooden and Bill Walton, they clashed some. When they
wow.
Because Bill was, like we said, a Renaissance man. He was a protester. He wanted to wear his hair long. Were you privy to some of those clashes they might have had?
I just know that playing for a national championship team,
a lot of pressure,
and you have a guy who is in the middle of Wilshire Boulevard sitting down as a protester. I don't know if he missed practice that day or not, but I know that there were times when, even before Bill played for Coach Wooden, the famous line was when Bill said, "My hair and my beard does not affect my play, Coach, so I'm going to wear my hair and my beard down to my shoulder when I play." And Coach looked at him and said, "Well, you know, Bill, we're going to miss you." Because, I have rules and principles that I have to have for my team, and you have to be clean shaven, and you have to have your hair cut. That was back in the day. Nowadays, guys pretty much look like they might have played for a rock band, but that's okay. But Coach, one of his players to look really nice and sharp and stuff. So
now, do you remember Jack Hirsch? Now, this is
yes.
Walt Hazzard told me this about Jack. He said Jack came to practice when Wooden was coach, won the championship '64, and put a Beatle wig on, and was running up at practice, and wouldn't just say anything. And then after the practice, they got him all together, and he said, "Well, Jack, I know you're trying to improve your appearance, but the wig has got to go."
There's some of the funniest things that I can remember happening in one of his practices. I guess somebody must have either stepped on a fly or a bug or something that was in the floor, and a player named at that time Louis Alcindor saw it and said, "Coach, there's something on the floor." and they actually had a burial ceremony.
Oh, are you kidding me?
It was some of the funniest stuff that happened. So they gave that fucker a funeral service at practice.
That was funny. Tell us about playing with Sidney Wicks. He was a kind of an interesting guy.
Sidney was a fierce competitor.
Yes.
And like the beginning of a lot of superstars, he wanted his way.
Yeah.
So there were games when he and Curtis didn't arrive. They weren't really late, but you know, they had their own little annex where they would wear their hats and stuff like that, and walk in front of the crowd before the games. And I saw Sidney drive the baseline more than one time that it seemed like a mosquito couldn't get through that space that he made it through. And he was so quick, and some of the games had so much pressure on him making that last shot because everybody knew that he was going to get in that last shot. And I'm trying to think exactly, I can't remember exactly which game it was, but Sidney had the ball and he dribbled it, and it was only a few seconds left on the clock, and he went one-on-one, and he made a jumper about 15, 17 feet. And it looked like after he made that shot, he just passed out because there was so much pressure on him. We had, in my era that I played at UCLA, we had several games that were, you know, we won maybe 3 points,
That's
5
right.
points, 1 point. But the bottom line is we came out victorious that game.
Now, the last thing I want to talk about is kind of a sensitive subject here. College basketball, as with amateur athletics as they were, is different now. When you were at UCLA, you guys were poor, but there was a booster that stepped in to help you, not necessarily you, but some other players, that was not an official booster. And I can forget his name at the senior moment. We're talking about
Sam Gilbert.
Sam Gilbert, that's right. And he helped out a lot of players, but according to the NCAA rules, it was illegal. Did you ever have an encounter with Sam Gilbert? And if you did, I know you did some things for other guys. Tell us about the role of Sam Gilbert.
Well, that was before NIL. That was before compensation for players. And I understood before I even got there that Sam had stepped in and had done some things to keep some players happy.
Yes.
Now, exactly what that was, I just know that he was a booster and he helped to keep some players happy to stay at UCLA because they were thinking about leaving, they were homesick,
Yes.
they didn't,
far away from home.
They couldn't go to McDonald's to have a cheeseburger because
Or
they
take
had
somebody out for, you know.
They were poor.
Yes.
And they were out of state, and so I think he might invite him over for dinner on Christmas and New Year's or something like that. But exactly what took place, I'm not privy of that information, but I understood that he was there to help some players to stay at school.
And you know, a struggling student, you could be local and be struggling, but if you're far away from home, the NCAA didn't allow you to work during the season especially.
Exactly.
And so you were really poor. I mean, you could go to the dorms to eat if you were living in a dormitory, but the other things that you really, really needed, if your parents weren't able to give you some of the money, you know, you had to struggle. But anyway, being that as it may, Kenny, was this really wonderful talking with you. We're old friends. Say hi to Daisy for me.
All right.
I knew your mother, didn't know your father. A true Long Beach legend. Long Beach Poly High School, go Jackrabbits. But thank you so much for coming in and with conversations with Erroll Parker and talking about your life in Long Beach, at UCLA, coaching at Verbum Dei High School, being a real estate agent, and really loving Long Beach. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to come in and do my thing one more time and talk to you about my life and sports in general. I appreciate the time to come in and say hello to you.
My pleasure. We were visiting with Kenny Booker, who was a Long Beach legend, Long Beach Franklin Junior High School,
Go
Long
Wildcats.
Beach Poly Long Beach Poly High School, Long Beach City College Vikings, UCLA Bruins, real estate agent, family man, a legend in Long Beach, and we were happy to have him on Conversations with Erroll Parker. Good night. In a democracy, citizens need to be informed. Informed about policies, issues, homelessness, law enforcement, and social services. In order for people to make good decisions that affect their lives, they need to be informed. Conversations with Erroll Parker.